But I think we will, in interest of time, we will start the session. And I have great pleasure in welcoming Mr. Jamshed Godrej, past President CII and Chairman of the CII Council on Climate Change, to please chair and moderate this session. Over to you, Mr. Godrej, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Seema, and welcome to this session on uh, to British High Commission and Mr. Navneet Munot, who's the Executive Director and Chief Investment Officer at SMF. I think it's that the next decade is going to be very crucial in terms of if you look at what has happened in the last century, there has been significant increase in global effects of global warming are there to see, whether it is to do with weather, it is to do with ice shelves, it's the marine environment and reefs, marine, the marine environment specifically to do with overfishing and coastline and erosion. Events in the last decade than we have seen in the last century. There are so many different that are of great concern. For instance, forest fires, especially in the recent few days in California, have wiped out huge areas of forest land, and forest degradation is a major concern. At the same time, the move to renewable energy has accelerated. I think there is much greater interest in renewable energy today as compared to what it was when, say, a decade established that a new power plant with renewable energy and storage combined is less expensive than putting up a thermal power plant. I think that the limits that we have reached on big dams, especially because of the worry of quakes, many issues that have taken place that don't give us that type of confidence that we are doing the right thing leading into the next decade. I think from industry point of view, industry is slowly awakening to the dangers of climate. I think there is a real understanding today that if industry is not going to be sustainable and become carbon positive over the next decade, it could contribute to the overall global warming situation. And I think more and more companies have signed up for allowing their businesses to become not just carbon neutral, but carbon positive. And so it's about carbon, it's about water. I think we all realize that water stress all over the world, and especially in India, due to over use of water in agriculture, has created huge water stress. In many parts of India, the water table has dropped so much that we are not in a position to be able to sustainably draw water. Courts, especially the National Green Tribunal, have come out with water from groundwater and how it should be, etc. So we are seeing, not just the effects of climate change, but I think severe huge amounts of again an increase in seawater rise, which will have its own consequential problems. We have seen this year that temperatures in the Arctic Circle have gone above 35 degrees centigrade for a short time, but they have gone above that. So we have to have an agenda that takes us to a much better position. And, because of the COVID pandemic, we have not been able to have many global events, especially the COP that was to have taken place in the UK. And also, I think the global pandemic is pointing out clearly that the human and animal interface is one that one has to look after very, very carefully. And any sort of exaggeration of that in a way very, and I think the WHO only about not just of loss. So in the core, that's what it appears from the screen. And we also have with us Mr. Navneet Muto, who will talk a little bit on the finance situation. I want to, of course, say very clearly that the financing of the intermediation that is required, not just in industry and in power and for water, but for all types of development. I think finance intermediation is going to become available. Green finance, the availability of financial instruments that are sustainable and investments in sustainable infrastructure in sustainability are crucial for us. And we will hear from Mr. Munot later. So with further, I would like to mention that COP26 has been delayed by a year. And to discuss that, I would like to now invite Ms. Jan Thompson to speak a little bit about the COP26, what our expectations from COP26 could be, what are the deliverables that could happen and will happen at the COP, and going forward, is there more that we can do in terms of bilateral partnerships on enhancing action on climate change, and which involves, of course, technology, it involves capacity. And is now ready to speak. May I now request you to speak?
Hi there. I'm so sorry. I've only just been able to get onto this call and I can't use my camera on this device. I had to go to somewhere else. But can you hear me at least? Great. I'm so sorry. I've been having a few technical problems. It's the story of 2020, isn't it? People not being able to get into virtual meetings.
Yes, but please go ahead. We can hear you.
Really, so I'm afraid I missed your introduction. I just came on now, but it is great to be here and thank you so much for the invitation. And I heard you there asking me to say something about COP26, and I will, which we're hosting later this year in Glasgow. inshallah, all being well. Let's hope that will all go well in terms of the actual physical hosting. Yeah, I wanted to make a few general remarks as well, if I may, and kind of set a bit of context.
Yes, please.
Is that, yeah?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
So it feels like 2020. We certainly would say this because of hosting COP26 next year coming up, but this year was anyway feeling to us like a critical year for the planet, and we all know that the climate change is real, it's threatening our future, and we had the agreement 5 years ago of the world leaders in Paris, sort of prelude to our COP26 6 years on now. Obviously they agreed to do what they could, keep mean temperature rises well below 2 degrees, strive for 1.5, and we're on a trajectory now, and we hope that will deliver results. And we also think increasingly we see co-benefits for economic development too. I think that is becoming increasingly evident, and that's true both for the UK and India. Obviously, we're both proud signatories of the Paris Agreement, and our leaders definitely recognise the importance of climate change, clean energy transition, and we feel that the UK and India are both, in a sense, a force for good on this agenda in the world. And I wanted I was hoping to just talk about 3 things. First of all, and I'll cover them each briefly, the action the UK is taking domestically to reduce our own emissions. Secondly, the actions we're taking in partnership with India. And then lastly, a word on what everyone listening hopefully can all do to try to make a difference. So what are we doing in the UK? Well, since 1990, we've reduced our emissions 42%, while growing our economy 72%. That's the fastest rate in the G20. So I love this statistic. You can reduce emissions 42% at the same time as growing the economy 72%. Though, I mean, that should be a really good advertisement for what is possible. And we have the largest offshore wind array in the world, 36% of global capacity. Our renewables share in electricity generation keeps going up. The first quarter of this year, it increased to 47%, which was a real high, because the first quarter of last year, it was just 35%. So it really jumped up, which I think reflects increased capacity and high load factors for wind technologies. And this year, we're also very proud to say that we've had our longest ever run of coal-free electricity generation since the Industrial Revolution. We had a 2-month streak of coal-free power from April to June. And also in August, wind generated the highest ever share of our electricity needs, with our turbines producing almost 60% of power outcome. We also like to think we're a bit of a leader on electric mobility. 5th of all the battery electric cars sold in Europe in 2018 were made in the UK. That share may have gone down a tiny bit since then as others come up, but we still feel like we're a leader there. And we definitely do a lot on providing public finance to support clean transition in other countries. We're the largest donor to the Green Climate Fund, and we're a leader in private sector green finance too. Obviously, a global centre of carbon trading. In London, there are more than 95 green bonds listed on the stock exchange, raising over $26 billion across 7 currencies. So we're kind of proud of that record, but of course we're not complacent, and a huge amount more needs to be done. We've also, seen the importance of trying to actually put this into legislation, put this into law, and make sure that successive governments are held to it. So last year we legislated to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. We were the first country to do that, and doubled our climate finance. So that is now $11.6 billion. So that's some of the money that we are putting towards helping clean transition in developing countries. So that's kind of a bit about the UK, but of course India is also really proud of its record too, and rightly. The pace at which renewables, especially solar, are coming onto the grid here is kind of incredible. And definitely the target that the Prime Minister Modi announced last year for renewables, the 450 gigawatt target by 2030, has definitely caught the world's attention because it's so huge, so amazingly huge. And really good to see that India's spending on solar energy is gradually eclipsing coal, and has now taken over that. I think that was last year, the first time that happened, so very positive and encouraging. And Prime Minister Modi's leadership on the world stage is very, very visible. Obviously, setting up the International Solar Alliance. The UK has now joined the International Solar Alliance, and that has been a big achievement. And we, the UK, are also very proud to be co-founders of the Indian-led Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, which had its launch earlier this year, which obviously Prime Minister Modi announced last year in New York. Lots that the Indian government too is doing, but also India is home to some of the biggest multinationals in the world. So it's not just the government that's taking action. It feels like some of those multinationals, those companies, are driving this change too. And we've seen, for example, Dalmia Cement was one of the first cement producers to commit to science-based targets, and has since been followed by some European competitors. So it's been setting the way. And I know Dalmia is now committed to be net zero by 2040, and has been ranked as a really sustainable cement producer. So encouraging. And Tata Power has said it will help to deliver India's renewable energy transition, and targets, I think, 40 to 50% of power generation through non-fossil fuel sources by 2025. Tata Steel has set an ambitious target to set the global industry benchmark in CO2 emissions by 2025. And Mahindra Group, and Mahindra sort of challenged all companies at the World Economic Forum in the year before last to set a science-based target, and committed all of the Mahindra Group companies to set one. And then just recently, Reliance Industries committed to becoming net carbon zero by 2035. So I think that's really encouraging to see the private sector, multinationals, really jumping on board this agenda and helping to drive it forward. So encouraged by that. Obviously, it's for every country to determine its own path to emissions reduction, but I think we all feel that we're facing many of the same challenges. So certainly we're really keen to partner with India on all of that, and it is a big part of our agenda. I just want to say a word on how the UK and India are working together on this agenda. Probably in 5 main different ways. First, the UK, we've made major investments in green technologies in India. We're the largest contributor to the World Bank's Clean Technology Fund. And India is the biggest recipient of clean technology funding, with investments for solar parks, rooftop solar, totaling $775 million. Second, we're sharing knowledge and exchanging ideas to help us develop policies, technologies, all of which will support the growth of green industries. For example, we work with the Ministry of Power on making the power sector smarter and more sustainable. And jointly with the Ministry of Power, we've now created the new Centre for Energy Regulation in Kanpur, which is all part of that agenda. Under a UK-India initiative on corporate green leadership, we have brought together existing industry groupings and global industry under an umbrella alliance with an aim to scale up voluntary adoption of low carbon solutions by Indian businesses and their supply chains. So it's the private sector again. Third, we really recognise the importance of climate resilience and the vulnerability of many Indian communities to climate shocks. And we're working with communities who are affected by climate change to try and minimise the impact. We're partnering with the Indian government and with states, including Odisha, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, to try and build climate resilience by strengthening the quality and productivity of how they manage their natural resource infrastructure. And fourthly, we're acting together on research and innovation. We have a £10 million joint programme under our Newton Bubba Fund on joint virtual centre on clean energy, which is addressing the challenge of how to integrate intermittent, this perennial challenge, how you integrate intermittent renewable energy sources with energy storage for both grids and isolated communities in India and the UK. And fifth and lastly, we're really, I think both UK and India are really focused, as I was saying earlier, on electric mobility, especially in our cities. And under our UK-India tech partnership, we've launched an Innovation Challenge Fund that will help research institutions and industry come together to develop new future mobility solutions in Maharashtra. And we were very happy that a UK company, EO Charging, has developed a joint venture that will roll out hundreds of new electric charging points across India, which we know are so needed. That felt like quite a long list, but it's just a taster of a lot of the work we are doing together. But we want to do more, and you are coming now to COP26, which you asked me about at the start. Next year we will host COP26 in Glasgow, and we want the world to come together and agree to further action. It will be the biggest summit the UK has ever hosted. We want it to be a really, truly global effort. We're anticipating 30,000 delegates. And we want countries to come there, cities, states, businesses, to all come together and try and move on to a really credible path to reach net zero globally in the coming decade. In the run up to that, we will be planning a year of climate action. So a whole set of meetings, comings together, events to try and drum up the drumbeat of action towards Glasgow. And we see work between the UK and India as being really crucial to that. India was obviously crucial to getting the agreement in Paris in 2015, and we see India as being a really key player in the work towards COP26 also. And very lastly, I was talking about what more everyone else can do. We certainly want to work with businesses on a really ambitious roadmap for global climate action between now and COP26. The race to zero, as it's called, the race to zero is one way that everyone can demonstrate their commitment. So this initiative is the largest ever alliance of businesses and non-state actors committed to reach net zero by 2050 at the latest. So businesses should join the race to zero through one of the partner initiatives, ideally the Business Ambition for 1.5 pledge. And nearly 1,000 businesses have already joined through that, including 10 from India. So I really hope that more will join and encourage that. So maybe I'll stop there just for now, and I said enough, but happy to come back in with a bit more on COP26 later.
Thank you very much, Ms. Thompson. Really appreciate giving us a very wide sweep of what is happening both in the UK and in cooperation with India. And we, of course, do hope that the next COP in Glasgow will be able to set a higher bar for the years ahead. As I had said in my opening remarks, the next decade is really going to be very crucial from a climate perspective. And I think that if the whole world, which is including industry and civil society and all the governments put together, don't really get down to working very hard and diligently, I think achieving some of our ambitious targets is going to be a challenge. So thank you for that broad explanation. I now would like to invite Mr. Munot to give us some introductory remarks on how SBI is handling the whole issue of climate in its portfolio of investing and in various companies. I think there's without doubt that green finance and the way that the banks and the financial institutions direct their money will be really crucial in our ability to be able to meet some of these targets. And you know, I know that the banks have, of course, a legacy of portfolios, but you can also be a huge influence in bringing about a change in your existing portfolio and nudging them rather strongly to move in a very green direction. So I will request you to talk about what the banks are doing and also how you see the larger ecosystem of banking and financing in India playing out and on the climate agenda. Thank you.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much, and it's great to be here. While I agree with you, we are all hoping that Glasgow would set the bar higher, but my sincere compliments to Seema and team to raise the bar higher this year, notwithstanding the COVID crisis and the challenges that we are facing. The Sustainability Conference of CII, which is one of the biggest thought leadership, I would say, platform in the area of sustainability, has certainly raised the bar higher this year. We are all speaking virtually. I would request her to calculate the carbon emission that all of us have saved. But I'm sure the minute I say this, somebody would argue, what about the economic impact? And the way economic output gets calculated, what about that? And these are the dimensions and the nuances that one has to think about while dealing with the issue of sustainability. I mean, you rightly mentioned that next decade will be very crucial for climate change, not only for the world, but for India as well. You highlighted several issues, pertaining to climate change that the world has faced in last century and the issues that India is facing. It was very heartening to hear Ms. Thompson's take on the race to zero and what could be the opportunities for all of us. So I compliment on UK's ambitious plan of doubling of green finance, achieving the vision of net zero carbon by 2050. And it was also heartening to hear her appreciation of ambitious goals set by Indian policymakers and the world-leading examples by some of the leaders of India. And she talked about the Tata Group, Mahindra Group, Jalmia, Bharat, and so on. And I strongly believe, sir, you rightly mentioned, I represent SBI Funds Management. We are the largest asset manager in India. And I strongly believe that large institutional investors like us should not only take into cognizance the risk that you have highlighted, but also I think we must play an important role in the transition towards a sustainable future, because climate change is no longer a long-term prerogative for the governments to act upon, because the implications are evident everywhere currently, and they will become much more pronounced in the next decade and decades thereafter, as you rightly mentioned. And investors like us can ignore these risks at our own peril. I mean, I would definitely say that, as you rightly mentioned. I mean, you highlighted a lot of extreme weather events that have occurred, including the Australian bushfire to the Californian forest fire. I would strongly urge everybody to read RBI's annual report, which is one of the best documents to read about Indian economy and financial markets. But this time, they've talked extensively about the climate risk in India. And it was heartening because financial markets at times, I would say in India, most of the times, have so far not been as cognizant of the risk that can arise from climate risk. I mean, it talks about the 8 cyclones that hit India in 2009, which is the highest since 1976. I mean, we have seen the downward shift in average rainfall, the depletion in water tables, increase in crop area, which got damaged due to droughts, unseasonal rains, heavy floods, so on and so forth. And of course, the global rise, the warming has led to a sharp rise in the annual average temperature that India has seen between 97 and 2019. And as I mean, a lot of global studies have shown that India is one of the most vulnerable country to the effects of climate change. In fact, according to some studies, almost $37 billion or roughly 2.7, 2.8 lakh crores of of economic output loss could be due to the climate change, which is like as much as the defense budget of India. I think we are particularly vulnerable due to extreme heat, due to low per capita income, social inequality, and heavy reliance on agriculture. And I think unless we take urgent action, I mean, we can lose like almost 5.5, 6% of working hours due to heat stress by 2050, which could be equivalent of like almost 34 million full-time jobs out of the total 80 million worldwide. And particularly because agriculture and construction, these are the two biggest employers in India, will bear the brunt of this loss in productivity. So for an investor, all these events, and I can go on and on, but I know in last 2 days, lots of speakers have highlighted these risks in a lot more eloquent manner. They will have real implication because they start impacting regulatory framework, they start impacting global trends, markets, consumer behavior. Talking about consumer behavior, if you look at the millennials in their choices of what they are consuming, when they look at the the purpose behind the brand or the longer term impact implications on planet behind the product, they are very particular about their work choices. I mean, they put purpose of the organization at the center of it. And similarly in their investing choices, when they are investing with us, they are not only looking at what their money is going to earn, but what their money will do to the planet over a long period of time. And that's why it's very important that investors take these things into cognizance. Now, India too is catching up fast on the responsible investing. I'll just give a 2 or 3 minute background of the response, the historical paradigm of the responsible investing and where we are today from a global context and in India. So it can be the sustainable investing as is known today, or we call it ESG investing environment, where we look at environmental footprint, social impact, and governance aspect. It can be traced back to the faith-based investing, where certain value system or a religious-based faith, etc., investors were shunning off certain sectors or investing in certain companies operating in certain sectors. As the industry grew over a period of time, shareholders realized that they could influence corporate behavior. And particular example, like before coming to climate change, I would say is like between 70s and 90s. For instance, pressure on fund managers to avoid investing in companies operating in South Africa was held up as one of the factors that helped end apartheid. And in the 80s and beyond, we have seen where environmental concerns gained more attention in the wake of several disasters. And then there was an awakening about the threat from climate change. But particularly after the 2008-9 crisis, I would say that it was a stark reminder of the interdependence between societies, economies, and financial markets. And it provided clear evidence that market pressures do not always result in ideal outcomes for the wider good. Now, there were a lot of debate around whether sector exclusion or excluding certain set of companies with a certain behavior was enough. There was a need to incentivize companies with good practices irrespective of the sectors. For example, in case of India, at $2,000 per capita for a very long time, we are yet to provide high quality electricity to a large part of our population. And then how do we make that transition? And this gave rise to the ESG paradigm, where investors believe that companies that worked for sustainable benefits of people, planet, and profit would yield better returns in a long-term horizon. So, I mean, the ESG principles is essentially a conscious approach that investors adopt to either only invest in positive value creating in sectors, or excluding companies that underperform on ESG benchmarks, or you can have best in class peer assessment while making investment. But engagement has turned out to be one of the most important tools in ESG integration, as responsible investors not only assume the responsibility of making conscious investment choices, but also to inform, to educate, to support the companies who do not perform well on these practices and disclosures for the holistic sustainable development of the society. So, I mean, as far as India is concerned, over the last few years, we have seen a lot of investors like us joining UNPRI, which is like one of the biggest platform For the investors like us, there are globally almost, I would say, more than $30 trillion of money which is into ESG focused investments, where we are actively looking at how do we engage with companies on improving their ESG score, on working closely with them for the goal of sustainability. Over the last couple of months, in fact, post the COVID crisis, we have seen that these funds seeing much higher inflows at the cost of outflows from several of the other funds. Over a period of time, particularly the initiatives like Climate Action 100 Plus, and we are an active part of Climate Action 100 Plus, which is a group of investors working closely with 160 largest carbon emitters in the world. There are 5 or 6 of those based in India, and we have been working very, very closely with those companies, both with their board as well as the management. And it's very critical that all investors, and I would urge all the other institutional investors to understand these risks as well as the concerns related to the carbon migration. And of course, it is very, very critical because all the companies have to align their goals to their own NCDs, their own Paris climate goals. And as India has to move towards achieving the 17 goals of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDG, over the next 10 years, and we have to get millions of Indians out of poverty and then achieve the goal of the $5 trillion economy, it's very important that institutional investors take cognizance of these risks and work actively with all the investee companies. While India started a little late on the trajectory relative to most of the institutional investors in Europe and some of the other parts in the world, but it's catching up pretty fast, and we have a long way to go. Lastly, I would say there are few challenges along the way, particularly in India, like data standardization issues. I mean, we have unavailability of the green taxonomy, etc. But with CII and a lot of other organizations, we have been working very closely to ensure that companies are not doing the greenwashing, to ensure that what exactly is green, how do we make the just transition, and issues like that. The evolution of the regulatory paradigm so far has been very useful, and I must compliment the policymakers for the recent improvements in the NVGs, and particularly the mandate of stewardship initiative by SEBI, where SEBI a couple of months back came out with this initiative where all the asset managers like us in India have to come out with their stewardship code. And over a period of time, we foresee that most institutional investors will integrate ESG-based investments in their investment process, which will be a positive step, which will be a very critical step, as Mr. Godrej highlighted, into a low carbon future. So it's a long journey, and I believe that investors like us will have to play a big role in this transition. We'll continue to live by our strong belief that what is good for the society is good for our portfolio as well, and there is no trade-off between that. In fact, those are complementary goals.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Manoj. Thank you for that. And thank you for asking about how much carbon we have saved by taking the Sustainability Summit online. I'm told that it's 50 tons of CO2 that we have saved as a result of taking it online. Of course, there would be lots of peripheral benefits aside from just the direct saving. There would be lots of indirect saving also. And one question I'll have for you is that credit rating agencies are very concerned, of course, about credit quality. But they rarely ask any questions about ESG and anything related to that. And as you have rightly said, that the banking system could have stranded assets if these issues are also not taken into account. And it's not only the direct financial health that is important. I wonder if we can consider, how they can credit rating agencies and banks can add a supplementary rating, which really covers the ESG. I know that that would mean a lot of training for bankers and agencies, etc. But it may be worth doing even on a voluntary basis, and it would certainly help. I think one of the key things that we have seen in India is that our high dependence on coal could lead us to large amounts of stranded assets in coal-fired power plants and coal fields, etc. And moving quickly out of these, I think, would be very useful from a financial perspective. And thank you for raising the fact that the RBI also has highlighted this issue very significantly and talked about the risk, not just to agriculture, but the risk to the economy that we would be facing if we were not looking at emissions carefully. So maybe you can cover that in your closing remarks. But at this time, I'd like to request Ms. Thompson if she could speak a little more on what the agenda for COP26 could be in Glasgow and what sort of outcomes we could hope to achieve from COP26. I think it's being billed certainly globally as the next most important one after Paris, uh, when the world came together uh, on this issue. And maybe you could comment a little more about how we should approach COP26 and its outcome, and how we can involve larger amounts of society to be participants.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, we do want it to be a really huge and significant moment for the planet, and we think it needs to be. And although in a way we are a little disappointed that we had to postpone it from this year, it does give us a little bit more time now to really try to mobilize governments, try to mobilize business, try to mobilize states, communities, young people behind this agenda. And of course, young people, I think, are the ones who probably need least mobilizing, but can be most incredibly influential on this. They really seem to get it. And we're hosting jointly with Italy the COP26 next year. And Italy will also be organising a youth summit beforehand to really try and make sure that the voice of those young people who understand this agenda so well and how important it is for their future can really be mobilised and heard. And at the summit itself, we want to focus on a few key themes which we think are going to be the most important areas to really address. We'll be looking at clean energy and what more can be done there. We will be looking at adaptation and resilience, which we know is so important for so many countries, and of course really important for India too, which is very climate vulnerable, as are so many countries around the world. So that will be a really important strand for us to focus on. We will be looking at clean transport, and I already touched earlier on electric mobility and how the costs are really coming down. This is becoming much, much more viable, and it's going to be a really important weapon in our armory to try and drive mitigation of emissions forward. And we will also be looking at biodiversity, which we know is another critical issue, really closely related and really important for us to focus on. So those are some of the key areas we'll be looking at alongside finance. And I spoke a bit about the commitment the UK has made to finance on this agenda, and to trying to support, in particular, developing countries who come from a different set of circumstances, from different perspectives, and need help to be able to make sure that they can shift to a greener growth model much earlier than some of us have done. And that requires help, and we know that finance will be a really important part of ensuring that we can get the kind of delivery and the kind of progress that we want. So we are hopeful that countries will commit in Glasgow to more ambitious nationally determined contributions. We want to see that. We are talking to countries around the world about what more they can do to show even more ambition. But we definitely don't want to neglect the private sector either, or the sub-state level. As I said, I think we will be keen that there is a role also for states, I mean sub-country level, sub-national level. We know that a lot of states in a number of countries around the world, or sub-national units, are really driving ahead, forging progress, moving things forward. We would like to hear from them and to share knowledge and experience and to see how that can help. And we very much see a role for the private sector. And I spoke earlier, and we've both spoken about the role of, for example, in India, of the private sector. That's very much true in the UK too, in a number of countries. I think the private sector sees increasingly that it has got to be part of the solution here, including traditionally dirty segments of the economy, dirty bits of the private sector, realise that they need to shift and really change things around and turn things around if they're going to survive, frankly. And we feel optimistic for a number of reasons. I think it's going to be tough, but it is becoming increasingly clear that renewables, low carbon options are financially viable, so that this makes sense not just for our planet, not just for our biodiversity, not just for all of children's futures, for the way we live, but we see that it actually makes sense financially. It makes sense in terms of economic models and futures. And that evidence is becoming increasingly clear that this is actually a smart decision to be making, not just a kind of the right thing to do. It's a smart decision. And I think, and I'll finish here, but I think also, I think we would hope that we will see renewed momentum now behind this kind of agenda following the COVID crisis. And I think a lot of people have talked about the fact that COVID, has obviously put the brakes on some things. There is worry about whether countries will be able to meet their emissions targets, their ambitions, because they need to prioritise the economy or do other things, or COVID has made things more complicated. I think, of course, in a sense, there's some truth to that, but I think COVID has also shown that this agenda cannot be something that we put off or postpone. It is part of all this, and we need to move forward on it. And we see that when we have a global challenge like COVID or like climate, then that needs global solutions, and we all need to come together to try and find answers and work together. It is no good trying to look for a COVID vaccine in one country, because COVID will just spread around from all the other countries. You need to find solutions that will work for everyone across the planet. And I think climate is another case in point in that. And on just a small note, living in India, having noticed that one positive thing, and of course among many, many terribly sad and tragic things from this pandemic, is the improved air quality. And I hope that will be a wake-up call to a lot of people around the globe. When they see, I think people have suddenly noticed what we have been doing to our planet, even more than they might have done previously. And I hope that will give a bit more impetus and vigor in our efforts as we move ahead in the next 18 months or so as we head towards Glasgow.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson, for pointing out some of the side effects of a lack of industrial activity because of COVID. I think the clean air and the clean water has certainly been noticed around the world. And thank you also for pointing out that UK was running on renewable energy for 2 months, which also shows that it is quite possible to do that, of course, in this pandemic situation. But I know that, for instance, in the past, Germany has run during the summer. Germany, Scandinavian countries, etc., all have run on only renewable energy for many weeks at a time. So this is really good. I'm going to ask you a question, Ms. Thompson, also to Mr. Munot. How do you see the carbon tax, being a contributor to moving faster towards our global goals of on climate.
Yeah, I have to confess to not be.
I think you're on mute now, Ms. Thompson.
Yep, sorry, don't know how much of what.
I think you've gone back on mute. Yeah, no. I think you're having some problem with your device. Let's go to Mr. Munot first then.
So of course, I mean, it can have a desired outcome of ensuring that the countries don't shift the issue of carbon emission to some other place. Carbon tax can kind of help there. If the US, instead of producing things there, are getting that from China, where the carbon emission is happening, then maybe through a carbon tax, I think you can kind of put the ensure that it is kind of measured rightly, and you can correct that. But I think it's quite nuanced, and there are so many dimensions to it. I mean, I'm sure you remember the Gilets Jaunes in the movement, the Yellow Vest movement on the roads of Paris. What all happened when Macron tried some of those kind of things, and it's very difficult to get the public opinion or the people's favor for some of these policies. And that's why it's very important that that S aspect and the interlinkages between the E and S, the environment and S, because ultimately all of that comes from the social behavior. Now, how do we nudge that social behavior? How do we have the right kind of policy framework? How do we ensure that technological advancements ensure that we reduce the carbon emission over a period of time? And the transition has to be very just. And the just transition part, I think, is very critical for all stakeholders.
Yeah, thank you. I think you've correctly pointed to some of the challenges for a carbon tax. But I think that many votaries of carbon tax feel that that this could be a big accelerator. Of
Absolutely.
course, the debate is out on that. Yeah. I don't know if Ms. Thompson, if you've been able to sort out your microphone problem. Yeah. Okay. Looks like you're still muted. Okay. There you are. I think you might be on now. Yeah, Ms. Thompson, I think you're unmuted now. No. Okay. So I think we can, we've had a very interesting series of issues and discussions on what our more ambitious agenda for the next decade can be. And I think there's no doubt that actions and the crucial role of finance in all of this can will certainly help us along that way. So let me thank both our speakers here this afternoon, Ms. Thompson and Mr. Munot, for their thoughts and intervention. And we look forward, of course, to a very successful COP in Glasgow. And we look forward to the banking system in India being much deeper involved and more, having greater effect on accelerating our move towards sustainability. So thank you all. I want to thank all our participants and all those who are listening for their questions and comments. And over to you, Seema.
Thank you, Mr. Godrej. Thank you to all our panelists. Thank you, Ms. Thompson, and thank you, Navneet. And it was a really interesting discussion, and it's given us a lot of action points as we wanted from the session for a much higher ambition of action in the next decade. Thank you all.